welcome. In this episode, I'm going to share encounters people had with Dogman. These stories include one from the United Kingdom that involves what most people there believe to be a Dogman attack, 2 sightings of the creature in Pine Barrens, New Jersey, and a rare sighting in Arizona. But first, we start with a story from Montana where one man had a terrifying encounter with what he describes as pure evil one night. Alright, let's get into today's stories. The first story of this episode comes to us from a poster who shares an encounter he had in July of 2013 while living in Montana. His home was located near a small rural community with approximately 2,000 people living there. The house was a single-story ranch-style home where he lived alone. His closest neighbor was a farmer who lived about a mile away. He mentions that the woods by his home always gave off an ominous feel to him even though he hadn't had many strange encounters there. It wasn't long after he moved in that he quickly realized why the home's previous owners moved out in such a hurry. He began hearing strange sounds emanating from the woods, sounds that were far from ordinary. He heard what he describes as blood-curdling screams and growling coming from amongst the trees. The bizarre noises prompted him to conduct some research, and he discovered that even common creatures like raccoons and bobcats could produce such eerie noises. After finding this out, he tried to convince himself that these common animals were behind the eerie sounds that he heard, yet something still felt off to him. He says it's difficult to put into words, but he had never experienced anything like that before. The woods instilled an uncomfortable feeling in him, and he always felt as if he was being watched. His first encounter occurred about 2 weeks after he moved in. There was a thunderstorm with booming thunder that kept him awake. He had always been uncomfortable during storms while by himself. The lightning, he says, was intense, illuminating the entire area for a split second with every strike. He was lying on the couch when he decided to get a glass of water around 2 a.m. Above the kitchen sink, there's a small window that overlooks the yard and the tree line beyond. When the next flash of lightning struck, he caught a glimpse of something. His yard and the tree line weren't lit up for very long, but it was enough for him to see it. A creature stood just within his yard near the tree line. Initially, he thought it might be a bear, but it wasn't. It was standing upright on 2 legs facing the house, with legs resembling that of a dog. He says he could distinctly see the hocks on this thing. The fur color was hard to determine, but it appeared dark. He describes the upper body as massive with a broad torso and arms that could almost touch the ground. What really stood out to him was how the upper body was much larger than its lower half. He remained there at the window after seeing this thing, paralyzed in fear, waiting for another lightning flash. But when it finally came, the creature was gone. Following that night, he purchased a gun and kept it within arm's reach while he slept. His second encounter with this being, he says, was the most terrifying moment of his life. For weeks, everything had been uneventful. Living without cable, he was forced to use satellite to watch TV. One night, he was watching television when the satellite started to malfunction. He normally avoided going outside at night, but this would be a quick fix. He just needed to adjust the antenna. Since nothing unusual had occurred for a while, he decided to go ahead and step outside to fix it. Armed with his firearm and flashlight, he ventured out. The first thing that struck him was the unsettling silence enveloping the area. He points out here that as night falls during that season, the woods usually buzzed with life, teeming with all sorts of creatures. But that night was different. A creeping dread settled in as he approached the satellite to make the necessary adjustments. As he did so, he heard a twig snap nearby and instinctively turned to his left, shining his flashlight toward the sound. He says what he saw that night will haunt him forever. There, staring back at him, were blood-red eyes filled with evil. The creature's head resembled a, quote, mutated German shepherd and bore an uncanny resemblance to a werewolf. Its long snout and pointed ears were unmistakable. The fur was black and shaggy in places, and its powerful muscles were evident. dwarfing even the largest humans, he says. It was partially crouched in the shadows, yet it still towered over him. He estimates that if it had been standing fully upright, it would have been 8 feet tall. He was only about 20 feet from this terrifying being, but never even considered going for his gun. Looking back now, he says it probably wouldn't have done him any good anyway, and probably would have just made this thing angry as it tore him to shreds. He cautiously backed away instead, maintaining eye contact with this creature the entire time. He picked up his gun with care, and his survival instincts kicked in. He decided to run, which he admits might not have been the wisest choice, but he figured if he stayed there, he would have died. He ran faster than he ever thought possible, not daring to look back. He had no idea if this thing was following him, and once he made it inside, he secured every door and window, pulled down the blinds, and sat against the wall holding his firearm tightly all night. He didn't sleep that night, and the days that followed were hardly restful. He has since moved away from that place. He closes by saying that many people often describe Sasquatch as a creature in tune with nature, seamlessly integrated into its environment. While encountering one might evoke fear, it often leans more toward a sense of wonder. However, his experience with the Dogman was entirely different. The creature he faced that night felt wrong. It was, according to him, unnatural, sinister, and evil. It was as if it was hunting him, playing with his fear, and he genuinely felt it could have taken his life. He hasn't ever encountered that feeling again, and it's a haunting memory he has tried to move past but has been unable to. He even still has nightmares about this thing. He believes the image of this thing he saw will be ingrained in his memory until the day he dies. He also adds that the images he's found that most closely resemble the creature he saw that night are the werewolves from the movie The Howling. I honestly can't say I blame him for moving out right away. I probably would have too. It would be difficult to go on normally knowing something like that is out there and willing to come that close to your home. I think he made the right choice by moving out. As far as him comparing this thing to a werewolf, I have a theory that werewolves are actually dogmen. Tales of werewolves go back to the Middle Ages and beyond. There are even hieroglyphics from ancient Egypt that depict a dogman-looking creature. Of course, there he is called Anubis. And who's to say that Anubis isn't a dogman or based off of one, and the ancient Egyptians thought him to be a godlike being, and that's why they worshipped him. But I think the most common comparison for dogmen are werewolves because there aren't really werewolves, just dogmen. As far as him saying the head looked like a German shepherd, this is the most common looking dogman I've heard of after delving deep into this particular rabbit hole. Now there are other kinds of dogmen with heads shaped like different kinds of canines, but the most common I see is compared to a German shepherd. This isn't the first story I've heard where the dogman in question is described as being very muscular. The most common comparison there is to that of a bodybuilder, which we will get to later in this episode. But they are usually described as being absolutely ripped. Another thing about this story that I hear a lot is that the dogman feels just plain evil. This comes up in too many stories to count and plays well into the theory that these creatures thrive off instilling fear in us. It's like a sick, twisted pleasure they get from it. I'm also not surprised that the OP still has nightmares about seeing this thing. Cryptids, more times than not, elicit PTSD in the people who see them. I think this has to do with how scared people are of them, but also them seeing something that isn't supposed to exist. I can't even begin to imagine the trauma that comes along with seeing something like a dogman or anything else cryptid related for that matter. I just hope the OP is doing better now and the nightmares have died down. What do you think about this one? What would you do if you saw something like that lurking around your home? And what do you think about my theory that werewolves aren't werewolves at all, but instead dogmen? The next story comes from someone responding to a post asking if there are any dogman sightings in the United Kingdom. As a matter of fact, I come across a lot of dogman sightings in the UK. They also have a lot of Sasquatch sightings too, as well as a number of other cryptids. The commenter says as much, detailing that there have been sightings all across the UK, including in Cornwall, Wales, Scotland, the northern parts of England, and Cannock Chase in Staffordshire, which is in the West Midlands. But one particular story caught his attention that he shared. This is a short second-hand account because unfortunately the poor woman involved didn't make it. There aren't a lot of stories about dogmen attacking people, so when I come across one I definitely perk up. For whatever reason, dogmen seem to get off on the fear they instill in people, but they seldom attack. But when they do, it's a gruesome affair. This story takes place in Scotland in December of 2021. It's backed up by a second commenter who lives in the country, not all that far from where this tragic encounter took place. It happened near the village of Monkton, which is located in the parish of Monkton and Prestwick. It's in the northern part of the country, 2.5 kilometers or 1.5 miles north of Glasgow Prestwick Airport. The man who lives there says that even the powers that be refused to talk about what happened that night. The victim had been driving when her car broke down. She called Breakdown Recovery and they told her they would arrive in about an hour to help. When the team finally got there, they discovered her car was left unattended. The next day, her body was located roughly a mile away. There was no reason for her to abandon her vehicle, especially to wander through the fields at night. It appeared that her remains had been disturbed. Both the media and police suggested that foxes and badgers were responsible for feeding on her. However, the commenter who told the story says it seems implausible that such extensive predation could occur in just one night. Many people speculate that a British dogman was behind her death, and there are whispers of a government and media cover-up. A common indicator of a cover-up, he says, is when a case goes silent shortly after new information is made public. What he says about a cover-up not only aligns with what the second commenter says, but with a lot of other dogman attacks as well. Just like in this story, normal animals are blamed for badly mutilated bodies, usually packs of wild dogs here in the US, and then the story is swept under the rug with seemingly no investigation or follow-ups. It's also typical in the US for government officials to show up, such as the FBI, for a case that is attributed to wild dog attacks, or sometimes the owner's pet or a neighborhood dog. It's very odd that the FBI or any other government organization would take over such a mundane, straightforward case. Unless, of course, something else was going on. Now, there is no mention of any agencies in Scotland showing up for this case, but there are similarities with how little was reported and then nothing else at all being said about what happened to this poor woman. There is also mention of government and media cover-ups surrounding this case as well. What do you think about this one? And what do you think happened to that poor woman? The next story comes to us from New Jersey, where one poster shares what happened to his friend in Pine Barrens. Pine Barrens is an ecosystem that spans more than 7 counties in the southern part of the state. The outer lying regions start just north of Freehold and stretch south past Cape May Courthouse near the southern tip of New Jersey. It runs down the coastline and reaches far enough east to include Blackwood, Glassboro, Elmer, and Bridgeton. The original poster's friend, who worked as an environmentalist in Pine Barrens, encountered a dogman in Manchester County. The OP's friend and his friends were driving through the woods in a pickup truck on their way out to do some camping. As they rode along at about 40 miles per hour, his friend was watching the tree line. That's when he noticed something moving behind them on the trail. He urged his friend to slow down, but before they could react, the creature leaped into the middle of the road before darting back into the trees. Everyone got a good look at this thing, with a friend describing it as standing between 7 and 9 feet tall, with a muscular build reminiscent of a bodybuilder, and a snout similar to that of a German Shepherd. He also mentions that its limbs were oddly human-like, ending in large claws, and it had a thick, bushy tail. He glanced at his friends and they looked like they had seen a ghost. Their faces were pale, completely drained of color. The OP ends his post by saying that his friend still tells this story and he believes him. He has also talked to the other people who were there and they all recount the story the same way with the same details. This story prompted one commenter to share his experience on Chilton Road in Pine Barrens, which he says is one of the most haunted roads in New Jersey. He was there with a friend and happened to see two pairs of dark yellow amber eyes. His gaze was drawn to the larger pair, which were wide set on a face hidden amongst the shadows. The eyes, according to him, shine like flashlight beams and he tried to track them, but they kept closing, concealing their true location. It was a chilling experience for him and he says he has no intention of ever returning there. His encounter happened around 2:30 in the morning. He says he has also seen the Jersey Devil, though not in Pine Barrens, and that it is absolutely real. Again, we have another Dogman encounter where the person seeing them describes the head as looking like a German Shepherd, and also the body as being similar to a bodybuilder's. Like I mentioned in the first story, these are two of the most common comparisons I see in Dogman stories. When I found this story, I looked up a map of the Pine Barrens and the area is huge. It would give a creature like this, as well as others, more than enough room to live and roam around in that they could go unnoticed. That is, unless they didn't want to, or someone has a chance encounter with one of these beings. Not only did the original poster's friends see this creature, but the other people along for the trip did as well. And they all still tell the same story and describe this thing the same way even years later. That would make me believe them too. And then there is the commenter who also saw a Dogman in the Pine Barrens. Now I know he only says he saw a set of amber eyes, but Dogmen are usually said to have either red or yellow colored eyes. Amber can be used to describe yellow and or orange, which fits. He also said that they shine like flashlight beams, which could allude to them glowing. This is something else that is used to describe Dogman's eyes. What do you think about this one? What would you do if you were riding along and saw something like that jump out in front of you? Or if you were out at night and you saw a set or two sets of glowing eyes looking at you? The final story of this episode comes from Arizona, where a man living in Flagstaff believes he saw a Dogman while taking the trash out at work one night. He says that before he did some research online, he didn't even know what a Dogman was. This story is also a rare account of a Dogman seen in Arizona. While he was working late one night, he went to take the garbage out. As he neared the dumpsters, an overwhelming odor similar to that of a wet dog and blood hit his nose. He then heard something rustling in a bush and was shocked to see a towering black figure standing there when he turned to look. It was roughly 7 to 8 feet tall by his estimation and covered in fur. It had a humanoid form but the head of a wolf or coyote. With its back facing him, it walked toward a dark part of the forest. He immediately ran when he saw this thing and says he didn't even think to take a picture of it. At first he thought it might be a bear, but he says it walked upright with the grace of a human or primate, and its hands looked more like those of a raccoon than the large flat paws of a bear. He ends by saying he's still uncertain about what he encountered that night, and his co-workers suggested it might have been a skinwalker, but when he went on Reddit he saw that it could have been a Dogman. He asked if anyone has any theories, wants to know if there are any Dogman sightings near Flagstaff, and if he should be worried. This is the first time I've heard of a Dogman encounter in Arizona. That region of the country is usually known for its skinwalker sightings and encounters. This is probably what prompted his friends to say it was a skinwalker. That has become a blanket term to describe every type of cryptid from crawlers to wendigo and now even Dogman. It has become popular on social media to call every unusual creature and or cryptid a skinwalker. Not everything is a skinwalker. And even if that's what this gentleman saw that night, it wouldn't have been a canine-like creature walking upright on two legs. Usually when skinwalkers are in animal form, they look like a normal animal except for being larger than normal and acting very odd. They do not walk upright on two legs. I'm sorry for the rant, but it gets tiring seeing everything called a skinwalker, especially when you do the research and know about all the different types of cryptids. But I digress. Anyway, moving on. From everything the man in this story described, he saw a dogman that night behind where he worked. Everything fits from the height to it being covered in fur, walking upright on two legs, being about 7 to 8 feet tall, and having a head that resembles a wolf or coyote. I'm just glad it didn't notice him and he was able to get out of there before it did. As for sightings in Flagstaff, this is the first one I've heard, but maybe someone who lives close to the area could shed some more light on that. Also, he wants to know if he should be worried, but it didn't sound like to me that the dogman even noticed that he was there, so hopefully it doesn't even know that he exists. Therefore, if I were him, I would definitely keep an eye out when I go outside at work at night, but I wouldn't be too worried about seeing this creature again. What do you think about this story? What would you do if you took the trash out to find a dogman walking around out there? Also, if you're from that part of the country or from Arizona or even Flagstaff, have you heard of any dogman encounters there? And that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you'd like to hear more stories like these and other types of cryptids, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you want to send me your story, I'd love to read it. My email is wolfwhocriedcryptid@gmail.com. I will also put it in the description below. With your permission, I may want to use it in an episode. Even if you'd prefer that I didn't share your story on my channel and just want someone to listen, email me. We can privately talk about your encounter. And please remember to keep it civil in the comments section. No one deserves to be ridiculed whether they believe or not. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you at the next episode.